Joining me now, the director of the Heritage Foundation's Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom and former foreign policy advisor under Margaret Thatcher, Nile Gardiner. Nile, always a pleasure. He did make us laugh several times listening to that, so we do appreciate, I think, working in the media business, a charismatic leader, and that's a reference to Donald Trump, the president, here as well. What is first on Boris Johnson's agenda? There's a long article in the Wall Street Journal about him, and that it's really, the title of it is, I don't know what he will do. And again, he's leaving many people guessing across the European continent, but also even in Great Britain and England. So, Niall, what is first on the agenda for Boris Johnson?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you very much for having me on the show here from London. And I have to say, a very exciting week here in London. A terrific opening speech from the new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. I think he's a real breath of fresh air here in London after Theresa May, who was a huge disappointment as Prime Minister. I think Boris Johnson is an optimistic, forward-looking, visionary Prime Minister. And his top priority right now, of course, is to deliver Brexit on October 31st. This is the deadline set by the European Union. Boris Johnson has pledged to deliver Brexit, deal or no deal, by October 31st. I think he's very serious about that. I spoke to many of his closest advisors this week on the Brexit issue, and they're all in agreement that Boris Johnson is 100% committed to getting Britain out of the EU on October 31st. That's going to dominate, I think, absolutely everything here in the UK over the coming weeks. And this, after all, is a Prime Minister who actively campaigned for Brexit. In contrast, Theresa May voted against Brexit. She campaigned against Brexit. And she was somebody who never had her heart in Brexit at all. And so with Boris Johnson, you have a PM who has believed in Brexit from day one and who is committed really to advancing a very powerful, a strong, robust global Britain, as he calls it, a Britain standing shoulder to shoulder with the United States on the world stage, and standing tall on the world stage as a leader for free markets, for free trade, as a country that will be freed from the shackles of the European Union. And Britain has been tied down now for many, many decades as a member of the EU. Britain will soon be a truly free sovereign nation. And this is a Prime Minister who, I believe, has the strength and the conviction to deliver it.
Niall, James Freeman at the Wall Street Journal. Speaking of the U.S. and Europe, his determination to have Brexit and a hard Brexit if necessary, do you expect now a new offer from the EU, or do you think they part ways and the first order of business is a trade deal with the United States? Well, I think that, you know, with the EU, they're really in denial here. I mean, if they think that the new British government is going to make any kind of concession at all to Brussels, they're absolutely mistaken. The British government is going to be very hard line on Brexit, fully committed to delivering Brexit, and they will be prepared to take Britain out of the EU under a no deal. And so it's really the ball is in the EU's court here. The EU has to decide whether they are prepared to make major concessions to Britain. Otherwise, there will be a no-deal Brexit. And I do think as well that if the EU wants to negotiate, they need to come here to London to negotiate. You don't need to have British negotiators going over to Brussels here. The British are happy to leave with a no-deal if necessary. At the end of the day, the priority for Britain is to just get out of the European Union. The EU has approached the negotiations with Great Britain over Brexit in extremely bad faith. They have been deeply unpleasant, nasty and vicious in their approach. They've approached it as a sort of punishment, beating. The British are no longer going to take that with a new Prime Minister, and Britain is going to get out of the European Union for good on October 31st. And yes, Britain will be looking forward to a very large US-UK free trade deal in the Brexit era. And eventually, I think the EU is going to catch up. They're going to realise that it's in their interest to have a free trade agreement with Great Britain. But we could well see, I think, a US-UK free trade deal in place in 2020 ahead of a UK-EU agreement.
Niall, it's Dagan again. How does Boris Johnson handle, in terms of first order of business? Let's talk about the British oil tanker that was seized by Iran.
Yes.
What does he do on that regard, you suspect?
Well, Boris Johnson really has to project strength and resolve, because we haven't seen that from Theresa May. She's handled the Iran issue extremely badly. And I do believe that Boris Johnson needs to take an entirely different approach. He needs to recognise that the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA agreement, is dead in the water. He needs to join the United States in enforcing sanctions against Iran. We need to see the end of Britain just following EU foreign policy. And Theresa May basically followed the policies of Brussels, Berlin and Paris on the Iran front. And this kind of weakness actually has only emboldened the Iranians. We need to stand up to Iranian aggression. We need to strengthen the sanctions that are in place. Britain needs to get out of the JCPOA Iran nuclear deal, which is an absolute disaster. Britain needs to send more warships over to the Gulf to protect British shipping, and to send a clear message to Iran that they are playing with fire here. We need to see an end to the appeasement approach that Europe has taken towards Iran. We need to see strength and resolve, and we need to see Great Britain and other European allies standing shoulder to shoulder with the United States, the leader of the free world, in confronting the Iranian threat. And I do think that Boris Johnson will be keen to shift British strategy on Iran. Many of his advisers would like to do so. And I do hope that we will see movement on this front in the coming weeks.
Now, before I let you go, the media there have to be incredibly excited to have someone like that as a prime minister, because, again, he's going to he's going to be a source of news all day long, every day, just based on his personality.
Yes, I think that, Boris Johnson is a very charismatic figure, and he's also he's a real conservative. Theresa May is not a real conservative, and I think that Boris Johnson is going to have a great relationship with Donald Trump. I think that they are two tremendous leaders who will work closely together. You're going to see a reinvigorated US-UK special relationship. And Boris Johnson really is a big-picture thinker. He's a real visionary. He's a great admirer of Winston Churchill and also Margaret Thatcher. He's an ideological conservative. And I think that he is the right man to turn Britain around right now, and to ensure that Britain is a great, great success in the Brexit era as a truly free, sovereign nation outside of the European Union. And above all, I think that Boris Johnson is a relentlessly optimistic politician who believes in Britain, who believes that Britain is a truly great nation, and he believes in the special relationship, and he believes that America and Britain must work together leading the free world. That's the kind of leadership that we really need right now.
Now, great to see you. Thank you so much. It was
great to see you too. Thank you very much.
Nile Gardiner.